You are listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, supported by Rapha, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004.
Where are we, Orla?
We're atop Le Col d'Izoard in the Alps on a beautiful sunny morning.
You're a little bit ambitious in your vest there.
Are you kidding me? I've got a pair of shorts and a skirt in my handbag to change into a little bit later. It's really quite warm now.
Anyway, that's Orla, Chennaoui. I'm Richard Moore, and we are joined this month for the Cycling Podcast Féminin by a very special guest, Lionel Birnie.
Oh dear. Hello. Hello.
Lionel.
You can tell I'm outside my comfort zone already, and not just because we're at 2,300 metres and I've been eating my way around France and have put on a bit of timber.
Here we are for the La Course, the first time La Course has happened outside of Paris and on the Champs-Élysées. We have made the effort before to get up to Paris in time to watch that, which has not always been easy because we've often been travelling there from this neck of the woods, the Alps or in Mont Ventoux or somewhere. But Lionel, this is very different this year. We're watching this stage which has just started from Briançon to the top of the Col d'Izoard. 2 days in Marseille, and the next part of this podcast will come from Marseille. We've got the Chase, which is a very innovative time trial type race where the woman who's first to the top here will go off first with the time gaps behind her, the time gaps as they are on the top of the Izoard. Very, very curious to see that. Wonder if it might be some sort of innovation to be rolled out in the Tour de France in the future. Who knows? We'll see how it goes. What are your hopes, expectations for this, Lionel?
Well, I think the most interesting thing about this is that we don't know what to expect. I don't cover women's cycling as much as you guys, so I'm not as familiar with how the riders will get on this climb. And really, we see so little of the elite women racing on a climb as giant as the Col d'Izoard. I mean, this is one of the big beasts of the Tour de France. It's one of the iconic climbs, not just of the Alps, not just of the Tour de France, but of world cycling. And so to see the women racing up here, I mean, I have no idea what to expect. Is it going to be ones and twos? Are there going to be small groups? Are the time gaps going to be huge? Really have no idea what to expect. And of course, then with the Chase time trial, it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out on Saturday, because all kinds of tactics could come into it. If, say, there's 20 seconds between the first two riders and 50 seconds to the next rider, will the first two riders team up together to make sure they don't get caught from behind, or will it just be a flat-out time trial? I mean, it's like the Hammer Series that we saw in the Netherlands in June for the Velon and World Tour teams, but with a slightly different twist.
Well, we did our Kilometre Zero last week on the La Course and the innovation. We heard from some of the riders, and a lot of them were looking forward to this far more, having watched the Hammer Series and realised that road racing can change and there can be these sorts of innovations. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. Orla, what are your thoughts?
I think that it's been really interesting to watch how opinions have changed as this particular format has evolved. I mean, if we look back to when the route for La Course was announced, and we'd all been hoping maybe for a 2-day race, a 3-day race, and there's a lot of disappointment that as it was then, this would just be a 67-kilometre stage to the top of the Col d'Izoard. And there was a lot of annoyance that the stage was so short at the time. I've noticed that annoyance has gone away quite a bit, and I think the fact that it is such a brutal stage, and it's going to be a wonderful race anyway, that the length is maybe they've got it right. I cannot wait to see what's going to happen on Saturday. I mean, today is going to be fascinating in terms of seeing just how big a time gap we're going to see, what kind of a race we're going to see, because it's a race right from the off. We're used to seeing very aggressive racing in the women's side of the sport, attack after attack after attack. We're seeing a little bit of that right now. And yeah, I think it's just going to be fascinating to watch, really. And the good thing is, I think there's an awful lot of open-mindedness with regards to this, and that's what we need. And we don't want people to just be automatically negative and say, well, it's not the same, it's not as much as we wanted, whatever. The riders themselves seem to be an awful lot more open-minded now than they were when the route was announced. So that's a good thing. Let's just embrace it and let's see what it brings.
I think the thing is, when talking about the format, ASO used to organise the Criterium International, a 2-day race with 3 stages. They generally have a flat stage for the sprinters, a mountain stage, and then a time trial. And that was a format that was dying, and it has now disappeared. Far better to have this innovative, interesting, potentially very exciting than just rehashing a format that has just withered on the vine. And I think ASO should be commended for branching out. It would have been very easy just to say, well, we're going to just carry on with La Course in Paris. This has captured the imagination, I think.
Absolutely. Rochelle Gilmore, who owns Wiggle High Five, felt that the distance was right. If this was a stage of the men's Tour de France, I think we'd be relishing it. You know, we saw in the Tour de France in the Pyrenees that a short stage, there was one stage of just 106 kilometres, certainly the most exciting stage of the race so far. So I don't think the length really should be seen as a negative thing. What we're seeing here is very, very aggressive racing. There's an attack gone off the front, a few teams represented in it. I think I spotted our audio diarist Alexis Ryan from Canyon SRAM in that front group. There's just been a crash of going to the Sunweb riders, and the bunch is strung out. So it's very, very aggressive. There's certainly no waiting for the climb. That's certainly the case. And let's watch the race and see what happens, see what unfolds.
One thing I just wanted to say was that we were curious to see how many of our colleagues would make the journey up here to the top of the Col d'Izoard so far in advance of the men's finish. So about 5 hours probably before the men will finish here. The women are due up here, and we wanted to see what kind of an interest there would be. So far, there aren't many up here. I really am not bothered by that. I think the main
because you don't like them.
I love everybody, you know I do. The main thing for me is that we are standing here in front of a huge screen watching this race live from start to finish. We were at Flèche Wallonne earlier this year. Even on site, we couldn't watch the whole race. So the fact that there are cameras following this from start to finish, that people are able to watch at home or they're able to catch up on YouTube later, there's going to be footage of the entire race, that is the one thing that is missing so badly in women's racing. And perhaps our colleagues down in the press centre or who'll be catching up later will watch this and say, well, actually, that was really quite exciting. And that to me is absolutely the key. We've got television footage, flag to finish, and we can see just what women's racing has to offer. And then you can decide, take it or leave it, but at least you've got the option.
Well, we've taken a little walk down the mountain and come back up. It is absolutely stunning here up the Col d'Izoard. And the women are now on the lower slopes. They've got 14 kilometres to go. Linda Willemsen is off the front. She is a very strong time trialist, but both Dolmans have been chasing her down. Marianne Vos already slipping out the back. Elena Cecchini as well from Canyon SRAM also seem to be in difficulty. It's time, I think, Lionel and Orla, for us to nail our colours to the mast and come out with a prediction for today. Who's going to win? Who's going to win, Lionel?
That's very difficult. I have absolutely no idea. Honestly, I have no idea. I mean, I would say Lizzie Deignan is an excellent climber and in very good form, and the fact that her team are working would suggest that she's feeling good, but it's really difficult to know. I mean, when the climb gets steep and when they really start attacking each other, anything could happen, and I don't even like predicting when we're talking about the Tour de France, so I'm going to abstain from pinning my colours to them.
Well, that was useful, wasn't it? Thanks for that, Lionel. Thanks for that insight. Orla, it's just a bit of fun. It's just a bit of fun. Orla, who do you think is going to win?
I'm going to abstain from that, thank you. Kidding. I'm going to go, right, I'll do a 3-2-1, shall I? I think, well, not necessarily, but any one of these three I think could win. So I think Megan Guarnier is showing incredible form. She won the last stage of the Giro Rosa, so she could be a good contender. Ashleigh Moolman Pasio, you've always got a fancy when it goes uphill. Or Sugar Elisa Longo-Borghini as well. But no, I'm going to go for Annemiek Van Vleuten, if she's in good form. She's been coming back incredibly well. She's had a good season. We know she can climb remarkably well, and I think it would just be poetic justice really after the Olympics last year. So I'm going to go Annemiek Van Vleuten.
Okay, well, you named all the names. I was going to name, I think, Longo-Borghini, but Kasia Niewiadoma is the one you didn't mention. I think she's got a very good chance. In fact, that's her very close to the front now. Well, that's Lizzie Deignan on the front now. So maybe she's working for Megan Guarnier, who knows? Yeah,
having said all that, I'm basically just naming everyone now, but I do kind of agree with Lionel. If it's not Annemiek Van Vleuten, I think this is the kind of a platform upon which Lizzie Deignan would easily win, in the sense that she might not be the best climber in the peloton, but she's such a good racer and she's so good at rising to the occasion that I wouldn't be surprised at all if she were to win. I think that would be a good tip. Just something I've noticed already, there is quite a bit of team presence. Several riders from Sunweb are in there, Boels Dolman, FDJ I've noticed, although they're right at the back, and obviously I'm probably sort of biased here because I recognise the jersey, so maybe that's not a great indication. But what's interesting is that there isn't a huge amount of team support, is there? It's going to be one person against one person as they get further up the mountain, and I think that's really the greatest thing, is that there's not going to be any room for defensiveness here. They've got to go out and make the gaps, and particularly the riders who perhaps aren't the best time trialists have to try and turn the screw. They've only got 12 kilometres left to do it.
And 6 women teams, of course, only 6 in each team. And yeah, Boels Dolmans are really chasing quite hard. And the lead's going out a bit for Willemsen, so interesting stuff. Very good ride from her. Orla, as we watch the race continue up, Lizzie Deignan doing a power of work on the front, which suggests that Lionel was right not to speculate. He was right the first time. Doesn't look like she's her team leader today, but they've just ridden past some bloke on a bike riding on the course. They just passed somebody out riding on the course, which would never happen in the men's race.
That's really disappointing to see. It's a bit ridiculous because he wasn't just on the course, he was on the same side of the road as the entire race. I mean, they had to almost pull out to overtake him. I mean, why would he do that for a start? Why would nobody stop him? It's just silly. And as you say, it wouldn't happen in the men's race.
Well, it looks very amateurish, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's fine that they got past that incident. They didn't seem too bothered. But I would say probably premature, but even Lizzie Deignan doing a lot of hard work doesn't necessarily mean that she might not go for it herself. I mean, we saw in the Ardennes weeks where she was putting in an awful lot of effort, still finished on the podium, so finished second actually. She can still drive it from the front, you never know.
Well, I think a lot of the action in this race is going to come at the back rather than the front. You know, I think we're seeing already lots of people getting dropped, and you know that's how it goes in the mountains, whether it's men or women, that it's a thinning down process rather than a race where the action is at the front, if you like.
And I think that's what's going to be really interesting today as well, because we often we question the strength and depth in the women's peloton, and we don't necessarily always have the landscape in which we can see that battle of attrition fought out. Today will be really interesting just to see how strung out the entire race will finish up, how much further up the field the front of the race will be compared to the rest. And I think that'll give us a good indicator when we're talking about, we would like to see more mountain stages, we'd like to see more mountain racing and the big climbs. This will give us a really good idea, I think, as to just how feasible that is and to still have a competitive race, because you don't want it to be a sideshow in any way, you don't want it to be a joke in any way, you want it to be proper racing. So I think this is a very good litmus test almost to see just how strong the entire race can be, and I think we'll see an awful lot of disparity between the times.
Well, yeah, I mean, don't forget the men also tend to arrive at the finish of stage like this in 1s, 2s, 3s and 4s. Somebody we didn't mention, Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, didn't mention her. She's not ridden a road race since Liège-Bastogne-Liège in April. She's been mountain biking and doing pretty well, winning races, so she didn't have such a good spring on the road, but maybe in a better place now and a bit more confident and fitter and stronger. We'll see. I think she's still in that group. We should also mention that a few more of our media colleagues have joined us up here, Orla. A lot of them are missing the start of the men's race in order to be here.
Yeah, and that's really encouraging, because that's one thing that we've been watching out for. We thought we might have been maybe flying a lone flag for women's racing up here, and it's not the case at all. Quite a few camera crews, print journalists.
Well, I even saw television's Daniel Freeb.
Yeah, television and the Cycling Podcast's Daniel Freeb is here, and he looked quite happy to be up here watching the race as well.
It's all relative, isn't it? I mean...
Pardon. Oh. We're being shunted off the road. 8.6 kilometres to go, but I think that's going to take a little while to cover.
Quite a lot of it is uphill.
yeah. It's going to be a slow old 8 kilometres. But Yeah, I've been very encouraged actually to see so many people here, and I'll be interested to see how the race is reported on as well. And also not just our colleagues, but a lot of fans have made the way up here this morning, nice and early, camping out. And it is a beautiful day, we've been gifted with that. But, you know, if we look at the very top of the Col d'Izoard, lots of people camped in front of the big screens, and we saw lots of people over the other side as well, ready to watch the race, queuing up buying their merchandise at the boutique officielle. But, you know, I think so far for me, the signs are encouraging as to how this race is being staged and how it's playing out.
Well, how did we get on with our predictions, folks? Annemiek Van Vleuten was the winner. I'm sure one of us said Annemiek Van Vleuten.
Boom! That was my prediction. Thank you very much. Yes, it was among about 8 other predictions, but that was the one I really, really meant.
But woman of the race, Lizzie Deignan. And at the finish, I mean, the polemics are already starting in the Boels-Dolman team. She was riding as a domestique to start with for Megan Guarnier, and then it was obvious that Deignan was riding much more strongly than Guarnier. And at the top here, the gap between Van Vleuten and Deignan, 43 seconds, that might have been considerably smaller had Deignan had the confidence, as she said in her interviews afterwards, to ride for herself a bit more. So interesting dynamics on the mountain.
Well, it was an interesting race, and the crowd was very good, I thought. It really thickened as they came up, and I think a lot of the riders really enjoyed it. And we spoke to a few of them at the finish. Lionel mentioned Lizzie Deignan. You spoke to her, Orla. Let's hear from her now.
I made a mistake in not having the confidence because I was really good today, and I messed up by being a domestique and then a leader. I did too much work really, but that's my own fault for not having confidence in myself. And Megan put her hand up and said she could be leader, so that's what we went with. And that's cycling.
Lizzie, you say that you were a domestique to begin with, and maybe there was a tactical mistake, but you looked like you could have been strong enough to lead from the front anyway. Did you feel you had the legs for that?
I felt really good in training, particularly after the Giro, and I'd felt good on the climbs in the Giro, but I didn't have the confidence to be leader today. Like, I've never been successful on a mountaintop in my career, so it was a bit too much to ask today to put my hand up to do that. But yeah, I'm pleased with the form that I had.
Will you rethink that for next time maybe?
Still not my favourite thing. I still prefer to be a classics woman over a mountain top rider, yeah.
How did it feel out there today? The crowds looked good. There was a lot of speculation as to how the stage would go compared to Paris. How did it feel riding it?
Oh, I loved it, yeah. I mean, a special experience to be able to ride through crowds like that. It would be great if we could do it more often, but I think we have the classics and the World Championships that are similar in terms of crowd and exposure, but yeah, a positive experience for sure. Difficult but positive.
So that was Lizzie Deignan. I mean, how many second places has she had this season? A lot.
And well, often to her teammates, Anna van der Breggen, but yeah, this time losing out to Annemiek van Vleuten. She wasn't very happy, I don't think. Interesting team dynamics between her and Megan Guarnier. They were both recovering just down behind the finish line, a couple of bends down the way. Not much chat, but obviously, I mean, they're a bit broken. Yeah, Megan seemed a little bit sheepish, I thought. There seemed maybe a bit of friction, maybe we read too much into that. Yeah, Megan obviously said she didn't have the legs for it today, but I think maybe regretting putting her hand up, you never know.
It was interesting, just a snap poll, how few of the riders seem to have ridden up the mountain in advance. I spoke at the finish to the rider who was third, Elisa Longo-Borghini from Wiggle High Five. She actually managed her effort really well because she was dropped a little bit earlier and obviously came back, finished pretty strongly. We haven't talked about the time gaps yet, but we will. She was 1:23 down, quite big time gaps, so Saturday will be fascinating. But here is the Italian Elisa Longo-Borghini. Well, how was that?
It was pretty exciting on the climb because there was a lot of people cheering for us. Of course, they were waiting for the men's, but still they were encouraging us. It was a short and hard stage with an altitude top finish, so I knew I had to control my ascent and not go over my limit, and this way I managed to get third.
Had you been up the climb already?
I did it yesterday by car, but I didn't reckon it by bike.
And I mean, riding today's race, how much was Saturday's time trial in the back of your mind. Was that constant in your thoughts in terms of managing your effort?
Bulls has some riders not far from each other, so I think in the end it can work out more like a road race.
You think that's what will happen on Saturday?
I
think riders will come together and it'll be...
Yeah, I think if you are smart, you try to regroup your teammates and to go and catch the leader.
Do you feel then today was a positive step, a positive change from La Course in Paris?
Indeed, it was a good show. It was nice not to have only the Champs-Élysées, which would be very nice to have again, but I think a very good format would be like a mountain stage, a real mountain stage, not 70 k's of racing, even though it was nice, not complaining, a TT and the Champs-Élysées race.
I love Longo Borghini's Italian Champions jersey. It's channeling Filippo Pozzato from a few years ago, isn't it? With the black and then the tricolour bands. Looks great. Well, if we could award Pedaleurs de Charme, I would award it to Elisa Longo Borghini.
We can award it, and we did award. We had Pedaleurs de Charme T-shirts last year. We are hoping that we launch a range of Pedaleurs de Charme T-shirts very soon with Rapha, who produce our Pedaleur de Charme T-shirts. Watch this space. A few contenders today.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of smooth pedalling, Lizzie Deignan looked absolutely at home on the mountain. I mean, she was strong from bottom to top, and you could almost see the moment where, in her mind, what she was doing switched. When Van Vleuten went away, that was clearly the dangerous moment, but she'd done all that work on the front, which actually put Guarnier in trouble. I mean, that was they really didn't get their communication right as a team beforehand, and just listening to Deignan, the weaker rider has to take the blame in that situation, really.
So I caught up with Megan as she was standing right beside Lizzie Deignan. Bit awkward, but let's hear from Megan now. How did you find that today?
Oh, it was hard. You're at altitude. It's relentless.
You were team leader coming into it. Were you confident ahead of the race?
No, I mean, this year has been a challenging year for me, so I was hoping for the best today, and I really hope for a podium, but Lizzie was amazing and got bowls on that podium. Unfortunately, I was fourth, so I did my best, and that's all I can ask for.
Are you looking ahead to Saturday in any way, or does that feel like a bit of an afterthought at this stage?
That's an afterthought. It not being a World Tour event and not an event I've ever raced or anybody's ever raced, it's not something that I've been targeting.
And just finally, what did you make of the race of itself today? A departure for La Course, something very different. How did you find it as a race of itself?
Yeah, it was pretty fast right from the start. Of course, it was only 67k, so that was good that we started racing immediately. It's not a race we ever do. We never finish on a 20k climb, so it's very, very different.
Would you welcome more of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think more racing, more challenging races are exactly what the women need.
It was interesting. Longo Borghini clearly had a bit of a thought in managing her effort the way she did towards Saturday's time trial. I got the impression Lizzie Deignan was not thinking about Saturday's time trial. In fact, in an interview with television's Daniel Freeb, when he asked her about Saturday, she said, the thing. And we were chatting at the finish there, Orla, to Ashleigh Moolman Pasio. We'll try and catch up with her properly on Saturday, but very interesting thoughts she had about this event today and about Saturday, because today was a Women's World Tour event with Women's World Tour points. Saturday isn't, and there aren't any UCI points, I believe, on offer on Saturday. So it's really what's in it for them other than the exposure, and you can understand why some of them feel a little bit aggrieved at that. And
I think they are just seeing it as a bit of an afterthought. I don't think there's any real resentment at that necessarily, but it wasn't the focus for any of the teams coming into these two races. It was all about the finish at the Col d'Izoire. But I think they're all willing to have a little bit of fun on Saturday. They obviously don't want to appear just simply grateful for given the opportunity to have that exposure, which, as you say, is pretty much all they've got. And maybe a bit of they might be guinea pigs to a certain extent to see how this would work for the men.
Guinea pigs are pioneers. I mean, it could be really, really interesting.
Yeah, and it all depends on the way you see it. But I think a lot of them are seeing it with open minds. See how it goes. I spoke to Leah Kirchman of Sunweb, who thinks she might have finished about 16th, just behind one of her teammates, and she was saying how they could have a few team tactics on the day, but they don't know how it's going to play out yet. But no one's really thinking ahead to Saturday yet. Yeah, open minds.
Will we hear from Kirchman now? Let's hear from her.
How did you find that?
Incredibly hard. Yeah, I've never done a race like this before, finishing on such a difficult climb.
And that comes with an awful lot of trepidation, I guess. How did it live up to the fear?
You know, I think teams still race rather aggressively before the climb. Yeah, we didn't just wait around and for it to explode on the climb. Teams were really trying for a breakaway there.
Do you know where you finished?
I think it was around 16th.
So you should be taking to the start line in Marseille on Saturday by that finish?
I guess so, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, that was kind of a secondary goal for the team. We wanted to have the best finish possible today, and then if that resulted in a few of us in the top 20, then we would be happy with that.
I know that you're completely spent. That was a brutal climb, so you're probably not thinking ahead to it just yet, but if you could project ahead to Saturday, you say you're looking forward to it, what can we expect? Something totally new?
Yeah, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. I'll have to see the results from this stage and the time gaps that are out there, because it is a reverse pursuit. But it could be interesting for our team because my teammate Sabrina just finished a little bit ahead of me, so who knows, maybe some team tactics can come into play in the time trial.
Yes, so you think we could see teams working together then?
It's possible. Yeah, we'll have to see who qualifies for the event.
Well, just behind Megan Guarnier was Shara Gillow, only 5 seconds behind. She was hoping to finish top 3, I think. Australian rider riding with Frances Desjeux, and she made the point about how important the race is for Frances Desjeux. They put a lot of resources into the women's team, and that's growing alongside the men's team. And our friend Francois Thomazeau, he's made the point, hasn't he, about, you know, Marc Madiot is kind of the traditional French chauvinist, if you like. That's not being unkind about him, but because the team is sponsored by a state entity, the National Lottery, quite rightly they're sponsoring a women's team as well. But let's hear from Shara Gillow about her first effort on this mountain.
I was hoping for a bit better, but I gave it everything. Yeah, it was my first time riding up here, and I tried to go for second or third for a podium for sure, or to win. But yeah, in the end it came down to 5th place, so a little bit disappointed, but in the end I gave it my all. So yeah, it was my first time climbing this, and I tried to do a little bit on the knowledge of the sports director last night. Just we sort of were talking about it, you know, this kilometre's 7%, this kilometre's 8%, this kilometre's 3%, and I thought, oh, that's a little bit too much to take in, but okay, I'll try and remember. I think the hardest part was the last 3Ks for me. Kind of exploded a bit with the altitude. I mean, I love the altitude, but when you haven't been exposed to it for a little bit, it's a bit difficult. And I thought, yeah, it's possible to win or for a podium today, but in the end, 5th position, I gave it my all. And yeah, it's a really big race for us because Frances Desjeux, they are putting a lot into this race, into other races, and I think it's a really good start for the women's cycling. For us to climb this, it's incredible. A real privilege for the women's cycling, and it's going in the right direction, I think. It's amazing. I'm very thankful that La Course could put this on, for sure.
So that was Shara Gillow. She's been riding very well all year on Frances Desjeux and Marc Madiot. Oh, we've got the Europop starting up.
My favourite bit.
Marc Madiot runs Frances Desjeux team. I think he's come a long way in his views from the 1980s when he expressed some support for women's racing, but suggested that they might wear more attractive outfits. Sort of Sepp Blatter style intervention from Marc Madiot back then. But yeah, it's great to see a Francis Dejeux team. I think there were more women in Francis Dejeux colours today than there are men in the men's Tour de France at the moment. And speaking of the French, I spoke to Audrey Cordon-Ragot at the finish. She is a good climber. She was Queen of the Mountains at the women's Tour, actually. Wasn't sure where she'd finish, and I haven't actually seen the results yet, so I'm not sure if she made the top 20. But she's always very interesting and very forthright, and here she is at the finish.
It was a hard day. I think the stage was so short, so it makes it really hard, and the pace was so high since the K0, and we had to catch all the breakaway to be all together at the bottom of the climb, and it's what I did. So I was a bit tired already at the bottom, so I choose to do my own pace and trying to not explode in the middle.
You always say what you think when it comes to your opinions and thoughts on racing. How do you feel this progression this year? Do you feel it's a positive move from Paris to here? How would you like to see it develop more?
I think it's really nice for women cycling, because it's the possibility for the climbers to show also their strength, and before it was only the sprinter, and it's not really showing the whole how the whole bunch is riding in general, and being here is showing that the girls can climb also the big cols like the men, and I hope in the future we can have and the mountain stage and the Paris stage. We will see.
And did you feel like the big crowds and stuff, they look quite big for most of the way?
Yeah, it was awesome. Like, they were cheering of course for the French girls, and I heard so many times my name, and I'm so proud also to see all the Bretons flag along the road, and yeah, it gives me goosebumps, and it's really nice.
That was Audrey Cordon-Ragot. You had some thoughts, Lionel, about the format?
Well, I think it's a very interesting format. I actually hadn't realised that Saturday's race doesn't quite count in UCI World Tour points, but there'll be a general classification, and they'll ride on road bikes, not on time trial bikes, and the gap between Annemiek Van Vleuten and Lizzie Deignan is 43 seconds. Now, Van Vleuten won the time trial at the Giro Rosa, which was only 12 and a bit kilometres. She won that convincingly. The gaps behind her were significant. She's also the Dutch time trial champion, so it's hard to see her being caught for 43 seconds. But behind Deignan, then there's Longo Borghini, Guarnier, Gillo and Spratt, who are really separated by only 18 seconds. And so it's going to be really interesting to see. And 18 seconds, they'll be able to see each other, lined up, almost like planes coming into land. Will they close up those gaps and then work together and try and chisel away at Van Vleuten's lead, or more significantly, Lizzie Deignan is probably catchable. But I'm really interested to see how that works, because I think there's great potential for this as a format. Orla and I were talking as they finished, they're going to go off with real time gaps, but maybe as the event evolves there'll be more of a kind of time bonus system, because a minute and 23 seconds or a minute and 30 seconds is a lot to bridge in that distance. But then, having said that, slog your way all the way up the Col d'Izoard and earn 43 seconds or a minute and a half gap, that needs to be reflected in the second stage, I guess. But we shall see. That's what I'm looking forward to, seeing how it pans out on the road.
Well, let's reconvene in the Stade Orange, as it's called now, Stade Vélodrome, home of Olympique Marseille, and watch as the event unfolds. See you there, both of you.
See you there.
The Cycling Podcast Féminin is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport, fueled by science.
Well, Lionel, that ripple of applause there was for the Annemiek Van Vleuten, the first rider to go off in stage 2 of La Course. She's just rolled out of the Stade Vélodrome, and there are a lot of people here, but they're very spread out. I'd say there are a few thousand people here. It's a 60,000 capacity arena. It will fill up later on, but La Course stage 2 is off and running, and in 40 odd seconds Lizzie Deignan will go off.
Yeah, well, I'm first of all blown away by the setup in here inside the stadium. Just to try and paint a bit of a picture, they've created 2 roadways kind of just running the length of the pitch. So on the far side of the stadium, Lizzie Deignan is now just going out through one of the big exits in the corner, and then in roughly, I'd imagine 40 minutes time, they'll come flying in through here, and the first person over the line, pretty much in the centre of the pitch, will be the winner of La Course overall. It's absolutely stunning venue, this. I was a little sceptical about having the final time trial and this stage actually inside the Vélodrome, but I think already we can see it's going to work.
It's certainly going to work. I think we'll discuss with Orla a bit later on whether the La Course going off before the men has been a success or not. I must admit to being a little bit disappointed by the underwhelming sort of start there to the women's race. They were doing warm-ups with the crowd earlier, and they were making far more noise then than they are making now for the female riders going off. I imagine Pauline Ferrand-Prévot will get a big cheer. There's huge interest in her. She's a very high profile in France. She's not going to win today. I was outside in the compound watching the teams warming up before the race, and there was a huge media scrum around Pauline Ferrand-Prévot. Not a lot of interest in the other riders. And Daniel Fried pointed out the other day after the Col d'Isère, L'Équipe had 14 pages of Tour de France coverage and 3 paragraphs about the women's race.
I mean, that's poor, really, to the point of scandalous. You know, the race was broadcast live. ITV4 showed it all from start to finish. You would expect that the publication so closely linked to the race organisers would give it more of a show, if only for kind of publicity purposes. I mean, what they actually didn't reflect the editorial value of the event either. I mean, it was scandalously sold short, really. Just thinking about your point there, Rich, about this race going off before the men's time trial and the inevitable sense, and we talked about it on Thursday, that this feels like a kind of warm-up, a precursor to the real thing. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Chris Froome and co will be going off at around about 4:30, perhaps even a bit later. It's quite a long afternoon to ask people to come to a stadium and sit and watch all afternoon, but it could be easily fixed. They could run half of the men's time trial and then have an hour's break in which La Course is held, and then do the main, the top 30, top 40 of the men's time trial, so that the women's race has a slot sort of far higher up the order of service, if you like, and that would then ensure that the stadium would be fuller and the atmosphere would be better. But this is the first one, so all these things can be ironed out, can be improved, and hopefully the Women's Road Commission will feed back from the riders, from the teams, and make some suggestions and for some improvements next year. Yeah,
there is a sense that they're still setting up. There's a stage there in the middle where presumably there'll be some kind of entertainment. I think it'll actually be French TV there in the middle, and they are still setting it up. But, this is a fantastic stage for anyone to perform on. I mentioned that I was in the compound. It was interesting to see the women's teams alongside the men's teams. Some of the women's teams share sponsors, like Orica Scott, Team Sunweb. There's a men's and a women's team, and it was interesting to see them sort of set up in the same place. We'll maybe speak to some of the directors of those teams later just to find out how much the men's and women's teams mix and how integrated the women's teams are into those setups. This is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, this is interesting because 4 riders are going off very close together. This is the back of the field, basically, and we've got Leah Kirkman, Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, Cécile Ludwig and Ursa Pinto all going out together as a little mini breakaway that's got to do some catching up. I'd quite like to go and find somewhere now to watch how this race unfolds.
Certainly. I was just going to mention, Lionel, that I was in the compound and I spoke to Ronnie Lauka, who runs the Canyon SRAM team. They've got one rider here, of course, Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, and he had some interesting things to say about this second part of La Course. Here is Ronnie Lauka. Ronnie, we're speaking before the time trial, and you like the idea, the concept.
Yes, of course I do. I think I like that people are looking into new ways how we can promote the sport and make the sport interesting. And I like that the ASO is so brave to give it a try. And so we are curious now with half an hour before the first start how it will end up and how attractive the concept will be. But I like that somebody was brave and is going for it.
Yeah, trying something completely new. I mean, there's been a bit of confusion even about how the riders would be selected for this. We didn't know if it was the top 20 or all the riders within 5 minutes, so that's the top 19 in the end.
It was confusing until the managers meeting because nobody really knew how many will be selected, and is it the first 20 or is it the first 5 minutes after behind the winner. But at the end it didn't matter. I mean, we knew that there's the ISOA race and we knew how that looks like, and we had to compete well or had to do well, and if we would not have done well, then we could have gone immediately home, which would have been a nice experience. luckily we managed to get Pauline in the top 20, and she is here now, and we like it. It was already complicated logistic-wise after the race, but at the end we sorted it out, and I mean, it was a new area for everyone. I mean, the organizers, the teams, and so we all had to make an effort, had to take some risk, but I think it's worth it.
I mean, yeah, you couldn't organize anyone's travel until you knew who was going to be riding today.
I had no flights booked or anything, so I had to do it. Like when I saw the first riders dropping, I said, okay, then they're not going to make it, and then I called the travel agent and said, okay, can you go look for a flight? And
you're booking flights during the race?
I had to, yeah.
Well, Lionel, no doubt at all about who the winner is going to be. Annemiek Van Vleuten set off 40 odd seconds in front of Lizzie Deignan. Lizzie Deignan seemed to maybe wait for Megan Guarnier, her teammate, and Elisa Longo-Borghini. They formed a three behind, but the gap stayed between like a minute and a half, minute 45 the whole way. I mean, we know Van Vleuten's a very strong time trialist, and it's never been in doubt. And with about 1.6 kilometres to go, she blew a kiss to the camera.
Well, she knows she's got it in the bag, doesn't she? And heading towards the stadium now, well inside the last kilometre, waving to the crowd again. And here she comes into the stadium.
Here she comes. So there we are. Not often we see we never see a time trial ridden like this, and the winner being the first one across the line and with her hands in the air.
No, it's interesting. I mean, the time gaps weren't quite small enough to really make it intriguing, but it was quite interesting to see that Lizzie Deignan obviously waited because three of them would be better than two chasing, but that hill in Marseille was steep and difficult, and although Van Vleuten did lose a little bit of time on there because Longo-Borghini was setting a good pace up there, the result was never really in doubt.
Never in doubt, but I'll be curious to hear the reactions from some of the riders, so shall we go and speak to them now? So Orla, I've managed to shake off Lionel, and we're in the car park after La Course has come to its conclusion. What did you make of it all?
It's a very good question, Richard, and the truth is I saw 5 seconds of the race maybe. Really disappointed, not necessarily with the organisers, I guess. This is the problem with putting on a women's race before a men's race and the logistics of today, because I'm here working for Sky, and the British interest really overall is for Chris Froome. That's the focus of our coverage. I was hoping that there might be a little bit more interest from back at base in the women's race, and there just hasn't been, which makes me think that, you know, we're operating in our little cycling bubble, and I think here it feels like it's a big deal. Outside of that, in the sporting landscape, I'm not sure it's made much of an impact. So I've been stuck out here. There's been nowhere to watch the race. I know that you were saying that even in the stadium you couldn't watch it for a lot of the race. I was trying to watch online. There was nothing on La Course website. So I managed to get into the underbelly of the stadium to watch Annemiek make her way into the Vélodrome and do her lap. So I knew that she'd won, and that was it. So I am a little bit disappointed, and this is why I enjoyed Col d'Izoard so much. This is the feel of Paris, whereby you're running around waiting on the climax to the men's race and trying to fit in a little bit of coverage of the women's race in the meantime. Col d'Izoard, because of its geographical isolation, because, you know, there wasn't so much of all of this furniture around us. We're surrounded by buses and teams and sponsors and fans. It just felt a bit purer. So I guess the important thing is if it was broadcast live from start to finish, what the audience at home made of it rather than the journalists here. But certainly the race itself didn't ruffle any feathers that I could see among the journalists gathered here. Well,
we'll hear an interview with one of the riders in a bit that is very interesting, touching on some of those points. I've never heard a car park beside a football stadium being described as being like Paris before, Orla. But no, you were sort of locked out here. I was in the stadium with Lionel, and I should explain that the race was not shown on the screens in the stadium other than the last 7 kilometres, and then it came and went a little bit. On the screens we had the stadium announcer, we had the DJ, and we had a trick like a BMXer, but he was performing in front of our eyes. We didn't need him on the screen as well. So that was really disappointing. And presentation is everything, isn't it? I mean, last month we were at the Women's Tour, and it's a great show because the organisers, it's obviously a standalone event, but you have a sense there that obviously it's all about the athletes, the riders who happen to be female, and the crowd therefore buy into it and they care about it because a big deal is made of it. Today, there was no attempt to really get the audience engaged in what was happening in the start of the race, to give them updates, tell them what was going on. Admittedly, the race itself fell a little bit flat because the time gaps on the Izoard were just too much, and they have to maybe look at not setting them off with exactly the time gaps they had on the climb. And there's a precedent for that at the Tour de France when they've had a team time trial in the past on occasions. The time gaps have not been the actual time gaps, but almost sort of bonus seconds. So you could have had today Annemiek Van Vleuten off 15 seconds in front of Lizzie Deignan, for example, and the race might have then been more interesting. But a very mixed range of opinions from the riders as well, some very, very positive, and we'll hear from a few of them now. I mean, first of all, the winner, Annemiek Van Vleuten, it's quite a story, isn't it, when you think about it? For a lot of people, she came to their attention really at the Olympic road race last year when she suffered that terrible, terrible crash. I get the impression she doesn't really like to dwell on that too much.
She seems to positively hate talking about it. I mean, I spoke to her. I was one of the first journalists to speak to her after she came out of hospital in Rio. And even then, when she still had the scars and the bandages, she didn't want to talk about the crash. She wanted to talk about the race. She wanted to talk about races coming up. But for whatever reason, I mean, I understand it really. Who wants to be associated with tragedy and disaster when you'd rather be remembered for your results? But yeah, I mean, I don't think I've really asked. No, I did. I asked her about it at Flèche Wallonne as well, actually. And I got a bit of a short answer. She didn't really like to talk about it, so I've learned my lesson.
Well, that's why I didn't ask her about it. Now, when I spoke to her back at the Orica Scott team bus, here is Annemiek Van Vleuten. How's it feeling to be the first winner of the two-day La Course?
For me, it's that the real win was on the Izoard, so that was the real race, and today was the kind of bonus. So in the end, it's really nice to take the victory, but I think I did it on the Izoard.
You must have been very confident today, setting out with your time trialling strength with such a lead.
Yeah, but still you have can be that they start to chase behind. If a race really smart, it could be a race of 6 against 1, so that could be interesting.
Did you have any idea what was happening behind?
No, they only told me at 3k to go what's happening behind, so that was a bit. Then I could enjoy the race, but I looked back, I could not see them, but after 4k I could see that they were working with the 3 of them together, so I felt like, then it's 3 against 1. So it can be interesting then for me to stay ahead of them, but I just stick to my plan, and I had a good tactical plan, I think.
What are your thoughts on the event? A big improvement from La Course just being a circuit race on the Champs-Élysées?
I think it's really good that they tried a different formula, so I hope that's great. But I don't know what we'll do next year, but I hope people enjoyed it watching at home. For me, it was just to be in the front.
Actually, about the Izoard, because a lot of people have been looking at your Strava time, comparing it with other times. I mean, describe what it was like to ride on such an iconic mountain and to win alone at the top.
We don't have often so uphill finish, so that's really great. So that's really special, and I don't think that it's not a good thing to compare women with men. Like, it's just different sports. Like in tennis, they also don't compare like how fast they hit the ball. It's just 2 different games. But yeah, for sure it was fun to see that I was pretty fast the last 5k on the Izoard and between the guys. So that was maybe also a sign that women get more and more professional and come a bit closer, and we also can ride really fast uphill.
So that was Annemiek Van Vleuten, the winner of both stages by definition. So she crossed, as I said to Lionel earlier, she crossed the line with her arms in the air. She was celebrating for about the last 2 kilometres. It was a bit of a procession for her, and then she's a very strong time trialist, very strong climber. So this was made for her, really. Behind her, Lizzie Deignan obviously joined forces with Megan Guarnier and Elisa Longo-Borghini. You spoke to her about her strategy and stuff in the race, so shall we hear from her now?
Let's do it. So Lizzie, congratulations. How was that?
Hard work, yeah. It was all full gas from the start to the finish. Well, not exactly the start for me. I waited on the others, so probably 22 and 100 metres shorter than the rest. But yeah, it was fine.
A lot of speculation, brand new format, people wondering what we would make of it. What did you think of it as a race?
At first, to be honest, instinctively I felt a little sort of trivialised by the whole thing, but I realised that it's important to be open-minded to it. At the end of the day, cycling's a business, and we got a lot of exposure for our sponsors, a lot of people talking, which is a good thing. But from an athlete point of view, it was kind of a weird race and difficult to really take it seriously when we didn't know what to expect. So we'll see what happens, yeah.
What was it like night starting and finishing in the Vélodrome, I mean, that for men and women is quite a spectacular setting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it was very special. Definitely grateful for the opportunity to race in front of so many people and to all the people that came out to support us. Yeah, it's been a fun event to be a part of, but I think fun is kind of the right word for it at the moment.
So a very different format to La Course. I presume they're going to be looking at options for next year. Maybe they'll do Paris again, maybe something like this. What would you like to see? Obviously your discipline would maybe favour more the climbing, but what do you think is good for the sport?
I think what's good for the sport is a real kind of professional approach to it, 2 proper stages or 3 proper stages, or just at least something that we're told in advance enough about to focus on properly, because that hasn't been the case. So yeah, a 3-stage would be great to showcase what everyone's capable of. Annemiek, this is perfect for her. She did a great ride, a fantastic climber and time trialist, so yeah, all credit to her for that.
You'd like to see World Tour points and offer for each of the stages, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. If the World Tour is to be taken seriously, then I think this is one of the biggest races that we have in terms of profile and exposure. I enjoyed the Col d'Izoire. Today was a little different, but yeah, I'm open-minded. Things have got to change, and if this is the way forward, then we'll see the public perception to it.
You are listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, supported by Rapha, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004.
Thank you very much to Rapha, our main sponsor at the Cycling Podcast Féminin. Thanks also to Science and Sport, who sponsor us. Annemiek Van Vleuten was voted Peddler de Charme. We ran a little Peddler de Charme poll. Peddlers de Charme after the Col d'Izoire stage. She was a comfortable winner over Lizzie Deignan, a bit like the race itself. I didn't present her with a t-shirt, Orla, because 1, I left them in the car, and 2, we are launching a range of Peddlers de Charme t-shirts and cycling jerseys in women's sizes, and I thought better to wait and give her the appropriate item of clothing. Although last month we did present a Peddler de Charme t-shirt to Kasia Niewiadoma, a small one, but not really her size. And when I saw her earlier, she recognised me, thanked me again for the t-shirt, and said she wears it in bed. So there you go.
She could probably go camping in it. It would be the size of a tent on her. It'd be so big. So she would, she could just, never mind take it to bed with her. She could just have it like, those 4-poster beds that have the canapes over them. She could drape the t-shirt over like that.
She can do whatever the hell she wants with it. But anyway, stay tuned for details of when our Peddlers de Charme clothing will be available. It'll be available.
It's been a long 3 weeks.
It'll be available at rapha.cc and at thecyclingpodcast.com if you click on shop. Now, Orla, we heard from Lizzie Deignan, her teammate Megan Guarnier. It's interesting dynamics between them. You spoke to her as well.
I did. She didn't look overly happy, but she's very generous with her time. And I asked her about the tactics, and she said about Lizzie waiting to ride with her and trying to catch up on Annemiek, and that it just wasn't possible. It was quite amusing, actually. Unfortunately, I turned the recorder off, but just after I'd finished, another journalist came over and was discussing the fans' approach to the race and how they were reading the race and whatnot. And he said, it was quite embarrassing, really, because they thought you were trying to catch Annemiek Van Vleuten. And she went, we were trying to catch Annemiek Van Vleuten. I couldn't have ridden any harder. So that was a bit confusing. Yeah, I asked her about her take on the race. And when she finished, she said, I hope that didn't come across as too negative. And she said that a few times. She didn't want to be too negative about the race, which makes me think that she was maybe hiding her emotions slightly and being a bit more diplomatic than she wanted to be. But here's what she had to say about it anyway. So, stage 2 of La Course done and dusted. How was it?
Yeah, it was interesting. It's hard. It's like a time trial, but not.
How different did it feel? There's a lot of speculation before as to how team tactics would play out, how different riders would strategise it. How different did it feel or otherwise?
Yeah, Lizzie waited for me. We tried to catch Annemiek. I fell off pace on the climb, and then we, in the end, didn't catch Annemiek. So,
what did you think of it as a race then? Lizzie had said, that she felt maybe the women's race was a bit of an afterthought. Did you enjoy it?
I prefer road racing. I don't think we're on the world stage here and we're doing an event we've never done. So it's difficult to show how diverse and how professional we are in a new race.
Are you glad that they've done this at least, or does it feel like a bit of a sideshow? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've got a very professional calendar. We've got the Women's World Tour. We've got amazing races anyway. Where does this fit into that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really happy to race the first stage and really mix things up, and that's a World Tour race. Again, this pursuit, time trial, road race, not quite sure what to call it. It's difficult to strategize that when the rest of the year we're either doing time trials, team time trials, or road races.
I mean, can you see it catching on? Obviously, the riders here today are here because they're very good at climbing, so it's a very different discipline.
Yeah, unless the World Tour starts to have handicap pursuits, I don't know how it would catch on, because we still need to build up the World Tour calendar, I think.
So if you were to give a judgment on how the race went, you know, as a two-part series, what would you say?
For us, it would be nice to be able to have our whole team participating in a multiple-day stage race. Here we started off with 6, and then now we're the biggest team on the stage 2 with 3. And then you have all these other teams with 1s and 2s, and that's not what road racing is. I mean, it's great to be here with the television, and I can say finishing in that velodrome with all the cheers, and I was 4th place, and it felt like I was going for the win. So that's pretty darn cool.
So maybe thanks ASO, but could try harder?
Thanks ASO. They had an idea to do something different, but it's hard to do something different on such a big stage in such a big setting. It makes it hard for us to adapt to it.
So that was Megan Guarnier there. I was at some of the team buses, Orla, as the riders started to come back, and it was really interesting hearing them discuss it with each other. The novelty of it, you know, how it played out in practice. A lot of them were very impressed by Van Vleuten's ride, obviously the way that she didn't just maintain the lead but built quite substantially on it. You know, very strong rider, and that did take away a little bit of the excitement, I guess, and the drama. And we had a bit of drama behind as groups came together. I mean, this format could work really, really well if that did happen, if you had groups coming together. And there was a terrific atmosphere in the stadium when Lizzie Deignan came in with Elisa Longo-Borghini, and there was a bit of a sprint between them. It's got great potential.
Yeah, I think it does, but it's left me a bit flat today. And again, I caveat that with the fact that I didn't actually get to watch it. But I think the potential that got us all so excited maybe just didn't reach that level. As well, something that struck me, you know, when we're surrounded by all these huge team buses and all the entourages for the Tour de France, is just the stature of the women's race, right? The women's peloton really right beside it. I mean, they've got team cars and whatnot. But for example, at Col d'Izoard, there were complaints that the women didn't have anywhere to change after the race, and they had to change in the open in public car parks. And today, I know that Lizzie Deignan was running around, she said, for some 45 minutes before the race trying to find a toilet, which just wouldn't happen in the men's race. But they are just of a different level, you know, and it's a different level of professionalism. It does maybe highlight, I think, how far we've got to go. And sometimes, I said before, we're almost in this little bubble, and I think we can get a little bit maybe grateful for any kind of progress while we're inside that bubble. And I don't really think it's a healthy thing to give too much credit necessarily where it's not due. So for me personally, I think job well done, fine, yeah, but let's work quite a bit harder to get it better next time.
And we spoke at the top of the Izoard a couple of days ago to Ashleigh Moolman Pasio, who is a very thoughtful person and has some very interesting views about the sport and about what could be done better, etc. And she was very interesting when we spoke to her on top of the mountain. So I went and caught up with her today for her verdict, I guess, on the event over the 2 days. And she had some interesting things to say. Here is Ashleigh Moolman Pasio. We spoke to you at the top of the Col d'Izoard. I mean, the time trial's done now. How was it as an event over the 2 days from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting. It's good to see cycling trying something new. I think it is important for the sport to move forward, to try some new formats like other sports have done, cricket as an example. So of course we have to experiment. You know, I've got some mixed feelings. You know, I've always been a very positive person and a very grateful person, and I would like to remain that way, but I am starting maybe to become a little bit more cynical with age, you know. So maybe trying to see both sides, and keep an open mind. Of course, like as a pro female cyclist, I have to be honest that I do kind of get the feeling that we're guinea pigs or showgirls as such, that we're not necessarily being taken seriously. And as someone that is a qualified chemical engineer, like I know that if I had to be working in the engineering field, I would have been taken seriously, even though I'm a woman. And so it's a little bit frustrating for me. But time will only tell. And of course, it is great to have an event on a stage of this kind. The Tour de France is a massive stage. But then it is quite disappointing to hear that we didn't really get very good exposure today. I mean, even if I just think of myself, okay, I was a little bit further behind, but I didn't see any cameras. So then you do all this hard work and nobody sees it. You're not giving your sponsors the exposure that you would like to. So then that is disappointing to hear. I mean, I know that on the Col d'Izoire, the coverage was very good. So of course we have to be grateful for that. But then it wasn't at prime time. People are at work and they can't watch it. And unfortunately, there was some negative feedback that we didn't get such good highlights coverage. ITV, as an example, didn't give us such good highlight exposure. I mean, it was an interesting format today. Of course, I would have liked to have been better on Thursday on the climb, because then I could have been more in contention. It was a bit hard. I did catch a few girls, and Cassia and I went away on the climb, which was great. At one stage we thought we might catch the girls ahead of us, but it didn't happen. I think maybe I need to go away and see what the reactions are, what the exposure, the reaction on the exposure was, to really get a proper sort of perspective of today. I can't help but have the feeling that we need more. We need to be taken more seriously.
There's room for improvement, isn't there? I know you don't want to be negative, and we don't want to be negative either. But it seems that there are very simple things that could be done that would make a big difference, and a lot of it is about presentation, isn't it? When you come and you're part of the Tour de France for a couple of days like this, how do you feel you're treated? How do you feel you are, as female riders, integrated into that tour circus, if you like? Do you feel part of that show, or do you feel very much like a sort of add-on, like a separate thing?
Very much an add-on. Definitely not part of it at all. There are obviously some people that are sort of more open to us, but it's a minority for sure. I mean, none of the male pros have even taken notice of the fact, or maybe they've noticed, but they don't even mention it, and it's just something so little, like a really famous guy like Chris Froome to just say something on social media. I mean, it takes him 2 minutes, and it would do wonders for our sport, So in that way, for sure, I mean, if the men really embraced us, we could really get a big boost combining with men's cycling. But at this point in time, I have to say that I just don't feel like they're embracing us. And there are some guys that are really great, and I'm going to mention him again, Mark Cavendish. I mean, he at least says something. Maybe it's because he has a daughter and he feels somehow connected. But I mean, at least I wrote an opinion piece that went on Cycling News last year, and he retweeted it. Great exposure, just because he retweeted it. And on the day of the Col d'Izoire, he writes, watching La Course, what do you guys think? Who's going to win? Just something like that. It's really big for us, and that's what I just wish the men would realize. It's a little bit like the United Nations push he for she campaign. That's kind of, if the men could put that behind us, the like he behind the she, it would do wonders for our sport. But if they don't do that, then I'm sorry, I feel like just an add-on, someone in the shadow, and then I become a little bit negative, and I think we need to do our own thing.
So that was Ashleigh Moolman Pasio. I mean, they are sometimes walking a bit of a tightrope. She's very keen not to appear negative, while also wanting to make some very justified, valid points. And I think she's got a lot of very interesting things to say, and some of the things she said about just little things that could be done by the male riders. Now, that's not their responsibility. We can't criticise Chris Froome for not doing his bit to support women's racing, but at the same time, it wouldn't cost them anything, and it would have quite a powerful effect. As she said, Mark Cavendish has been a great ambassador for women's cycling, and also quite a lot of the younger male riders, because there are lots of female riders now. A lot of them know each other. There are a few relationships there. A lot of them live in Girona, for example, and I get the feeling that some of the younger male riders have far more respect, basically, for the female riders. Yeah, I think Ashleigh Moolman is sort of, she's reluctant to sound too critical, but wants to get those points of view across, and I'm glad that she does and speaks so honestly and eloquently on the subject. You spoke to Joanna Rousseau-Shand in the stadium as well, Orla, and she made an interesting point in this regard.
Yeah, I was asking her just her opinion on the format, and again, she was very open to the concept of it. But she said that she would have loved something like this when she was racing and really relished the prospect of what the race could be. And we were just saying that it is important to note that change doesn't happen overnight, and without being grateful for any small gifts that the female peloton are given, nor do we just want to be negative about things. And, you know, I was very, very enthusiastic about this whole concept. With a few tweaks, it could be amazing. It's not there yet, but, you know, at least they are trying something. And it's like Barry Austin from Canyon SRAM said to me during the women's tour, that at least they're moving. The main thing is to not remain static. As soon as you stop moving, you're actually going backwards. So, you know, we're all talking, is this a forward step or a sideward step? He was like, I don't care. It's a step. And that's the main thing. And they're trying something different. And if it doesn't work, okay, change it up next time. I think a lot of us would like to see a mountain stage, a time trial, and a sprint into Paris. I don't see why now that can't happen. You know, ASO have now trialled two very different kinds of stages alongside the men's races, so maybe then it can give them confidence that they're able to do it without interfering with the men's race. But it is important to note that you know, there is movement, and that has to be progress of some form.
I think we should end on a positive note, and I was speaking earlier to Molly Weaver, who will feature in next month's Podcast Féminin. She's come back from a terrible, really life-threatening crash, and unfortunately on the Col d'Ivoire stage suffered another very bad crash. She's very bashed up, grazes on her chin, lots of road rash, but she's okay, and we'll hear a couple of interviews with her sort of before and after in next month's podcast. But she rides for Team Sunweb, and you know, they're one of the very few teams that have a men's team and a women's team, and I think they're the only team where those two teams are quite integrated. And it was really interesting today because they had the women's team had their camper van alongside the men's bus, and it was interesting to see the male and the female riders, you know, mixing and chatting. Michael Matthews went and sat in the camper van for a while, and they know each other. They go on training camps together. And I remember when Tom Dumoulin was winning the Giro, there was a lot of support on social media and stuff from the Sunweb female riders. And Molly Weaver was saying that they really do feel like one team, and that's nice to see. So we should end on that positive note. I say Molly Weaver will feature in next month's Podcast Féminin. But as we leave you from a car park in Marseille, anything to add, Orla? No, well, I just wanted to say really quickly about the Sunweb concept. I think we talk an awful lot about the pros and cons of men's and women's races together and having them completely separate. If we have more men's and women's races together, then actually the concept of Sunweb becomes much more profitable, because if you look at the riders on the Col d'Ivoire on Thursday, and most people are watching the Tour de France every day, they will recognise Sunweb straight away, and they know exactly, and that's automatic exposure once again for the team, whereas some of the other female sponsors teams, they might have been lost somewhere in there. So, you know, if we see more of them together, then it's cheap as chips, really, relatively speaking, for any of these big teams to start up a women's team alongside, and then that might start to make sense. I mean, it won't solve everything, but it's just a thought. Speaking of chips, Orla, that just gave me an immediate hunger pang. I'm very hungry, because this is the other thing about any of the press who left the press centre to watch La Course missed the press buffet, I've just discovered, which is an absolute disaster, and we've got no energy balls here. I might have one solitary Haribo crocodile to give to you. Oh God, it's been sitting in my bag for 4 days, but it's yours if you want it. I'm that kind of person. Oh wow, that's a very generous offer. Thanks, Orla. Anyway, that's all for this month. We'll be back next month. Thank you, Orla. Thank you very much, Richard.
You are listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, supported by Rapha, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004.